Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this very special update from the Lion Recovery Fund. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm your host today. I'm the Director of Conservation Programs at the Wildlife Conservation Network. And at WCN, we protect endangered wildlife by supporting conservationists who ensure wildlife and people coexist in a very rapidly changing modern world. And I just want to mention that I think what sets us apart at WCN is the network. It's not just a network of conservationists, but it's a network of people like yourselves. So thank you for joining us today. And we hope that this update gives you that sort of direct access to the people and the wildlife and the programs that we have around the world to give you a better sense of the work that we do. And so today is all about our Lion Recovery Fund. And the timing is great because this Saturday marks World Lion Day, August 10th. So we wanted to give you an inside look at how our Lion Recovery Fund programs are doing. We're joined by the director of the LRF, Dr. Peter Lindsay, who's going to give us that great update. And in terms of just some scene setting, right, we created the LRF in response to the fact that lions were facing severe threats. And we lost half of the entire population of lions in Africa in just a quarter of a century. So this was sort of a silent threat that was happening since most people didn't know that lions were in trouble. So we knew we needed to get resources, more resources to lion conservation projects to unlock the value of lions for local communities who live alongside lions, and then also expand the coverage of conservation projects where lions live. So I'm excited to say that since we established the LRF, we've raised and deployed $40 million for lion conservation projects in Africa. That's a huge milestone, and it's all thanks to you. So really, it's a tremendous milestone. We're really proud of the accomplishments, and there's definitely more to be done. And that's what today is all about, is sharing the progress we've made so far, but also talking about what's on the horizon for the LRF. Now, before we officially get started, just a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, and we will post it on YouTube by next week so we can share it with more people. And this is also a chance for you to ask the questions that you have about lions, lion conservation, issues across Africa. So please use the chat feature, type in your questions during today's presentation, and then afterwards, Pete and I will have a conversation and we will answer your questions live. So now let me introduce you to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Peter Lindsay, who is joining us from his home in Zimbabwe. Pete is the director of the Lion Recovery Fund here at the Wildlife Conservation Network. He joined the team in 2017, and he brings with him an immense depth of knowledge about not just lions, but conservation issues in Africa. You'll soon find out that he has immense passion for this work. He got a degree at Oxford, and he has his PhD from the Mammal Research Institute at the University of Pretoria. And his early passions include African painted dogs, but now we have thoroughly ensconced him over in the lion world. So Pete, please welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself and then what we're about to hear today.
Hi, thanks, Paul, and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for turning up today. Really appreciate it. And yeah, so I am speaking to you today from Harare in Zimbabwe, which is home. I've done conservation in Africa my whole career. It's something that I've had a lifelong passion for, so I can't imagine doing anything else. There's been a big focus on large carnivores, as Paul suggested, but over recent years, it's really focused more and more on Africa's lions. And they're a critical flagship for Africa's wild landscapes, which I would say is my real passion, Africa's wild spaces. So I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm going to get started. Let me see if I can do this without making a hash of it. Here we are. There we are. Okay, Paul, just tell me if you can see everything okay before I launch
Yeah,
into it.
you're looking good.
Sweet. Okay, guys. So today, the focus of my presentation is going to be on working towards human-lion coexistence in Africa. Okay, so as Paul alluded to, the Lion Recovery Fund was established in response to dramatic declines in the lion population. So this slide depicts a very approximate estimation of the pre-colonial distribution of lions. It probably wasn't quite as uniform as that, but basically lions were very widespread across the areas, the savanna and semi-arid areas and forest savanna mosaic areas of Africa. By 2006, which is when the continent's lion scientists really started to notice that there was a problem with lions. There was a big meeting in Johannesburg in 2006. And this was a depiction of lion range at that time. And as you can see, they were still believed to be very widespread. But if you look at the current depiction of range, which you'll see on the next slide, there's been a very significant contraction since then. And so the lion range has become smaller and more fragmented in just that short space of time. So lions currently occupy about 7% of their historical range, and the best estimate of lion numbers is about 23,000, albeit with a great deal of uncertainty around that. So lions are facing the most difficult conditions they've ever faced, and it's my belief that in the coming decades, they'll face the most difficult conditions that they will ever face. So the human population in Africa is growing very quickly. A lot of the world has seen declining birth rates, and in many parts of the world, they're now below replacement rate. But in Africa, the birth rates have stayed higher for longer. And although they are coming down, they're still sufficiently high that the population is going to increase very substantially, as of course it did elsewhere in the world. So it's a natural part of the kind of demographic changes that the world has experienced. But it is going to pose some challenges in terms of demand for space for wildlife. And as the human population grows, the livestock populations have been growing quickly. And then there's also very intense pressure on Africa's natural resources from all quarters, but including international corporations and countries overseas that have very high demand for natural resources due to excess consumption, etc. And in the case of parts of the world, there's big demand for wildlife products, particularly to Asia. And this creates a lot of pressure on the combined effect of these factors creates pressure on Africa, both for land. So there's more and more competition for land, for settlement and agriculture and mining and development. And so there's more and more of a close interface between wildlife and people, which means that, there are relatively fewer and fewer areas where wildlife can just kind of persist without much human impact. But there's also very intense pressure on wildlife populations and lion populations themselves. So that's the kind of the bad news. It's good. I do believe it's going to get harder before it gets easier. But I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I think that once we pass through this kind of these demographic changes, and when the human population stabilizes and then gradually declines, as funding for conservation increases, as global and local recognition of the importance for conservation continues to increase, I think that we'll see an improvement. So it's my firm belief that it's the efforts that we take now and in the coming generation or two or three that will essentially establish what is left to conserve in perpetuity. So I think if we can get through the next 100 years, I think that pretty much what we conserve by then, most of what we conserve by then, I think should be there for perpetuity. So we've got a big job on our shoulders now, but there's reasons to be optimistic. So firstly, lions are incredibly resilient. They breed very quickly. And if you protect them, their habitats and their prey, they can recover in remarkable time. Africa set aside immense areas of land for conservation. So we have these enormous wildlife estates, and we really have an incredible amount still to conserve and to be very grateful for. The political will for conservation is very strong in Africa. So I think we can be extremely grateful for the commitment of African countries and African people to conservation. I think it's quite remarkable that I think African countries don't get the credit they deserve for this in many cases. And then there's also, in many cases, a remarkable willingness of local people to coexist with lions and other wildlife, even though they're a really difficult animal to live with. I mean, if you look at the kind of hoo-ha that is made by ranchers in the US or landowners in Europe, for example, about wolves, you can appreciate how tolerant many people are in Africa, because lions are significantly more difficult to live with than wolves. I think that's clear. So coexistence between people and lions is possible. And I want to give you a bit of an insight today into some of the strategies that we are supporting that can help achieve this. Okay, so I think one of the most important strategies is to try and create frameworks that position and reward local communities as custodians over nature on behalf of the world. So as you know, the world has throws a lot of kind of aid and development funding at Africa, which has kind of varying outcomes. But it's my belief that a potentially really impactful use of such funding would be if we can create frameworks that basically empower communities to look after nature in Africa on behalf of the world, and we essentially pay for those services, then instead of giving charity or kind of setting up white elephant development projects, you're essentially paying people to deliver a critical environmental service that benefits both local people and economies, but also can protect nature in perpetuity. So there's a number of different ways to do this. One of them, and the most obvious one, is perhaps through employment. So hiring people directly to deliver environmental services, whether it's protecting lions or whether it's managing conservancies or whether it's working as rangers. And the LRF has supported the employment of over 3,000 people across Africa to date. And so we're definitely contributing to this, to this form of empowerment. And this can be really impactful. For example, these guys in the green are ex-poachers who've been hired by TANAPA, that's Tanzania National Parks Authority, and Serengeti National Park, with help from our grantee, Frankfurt Zoological Society, to do desnaring. And these guys are incredibly effective, of course, because they used to hunt illegally themselves, and so they know exactly how poaching happens and are really effective at combating it. So that's just another example of how effective employment can be. Another mechanism for, as I say, for positioning and rewarding communities to be custodians over nature is through performance payments. So essentially what this speaks to is there's a growing number of examples of where NGOs are developing conservation agreements with communities, such that they agree to do certain things or not do certain things, and then they get rewarded on the basis of fulfilling that agreement. And so some of our grantees, for example, use camera traps like this, and then the communities are rewarded for the abundance, diversity, and distribution of wildlife that's observed on their land. So this creates a very tangible link between wildlife presence and benefits for local people. So, for example, this is a check that's been paid out to communities by Lion Landscapes in the Laikipia area of Kenya. And an evolution of this idea is to develop biodiversity credits. So actually, Lion Landscapes are developing this idea at the moment. So they do have a performance payments and community camera trapping program, but they want to transition this into a biodiversity credit as a means of harnessing kind of corporate investment in the conservation space that will result in income for communities that are looking after wildlife on their land. And this will help to monetize conservation and help it compete with other competing land uses, and really make it crystal clear in the minds of community members how valuable wildlife is to them. So another example is lion carbon. So one of our early grantees, Biocarbon Partners in Zambia, have been protecting woodlands and forests, and then they've been selling carbon credits, that some of which accrue, a significant proportion accrue to communities. And they've been selling carbon credits at a premium based on the fact that lions are present in those landscapes. So that seems to have some potential. Another example is through lion-friendly beef or meat. And so two of our grantees are trialing this. One, again, Lion Landscapes in Laikipia, and then Claus Conservancy in Botswana are trialing this, and they've been working with some of the local tourism operators. I believe Wilderness are involved in this. And I believe that the local communities have achieved double the price for their beef as a result of stock being certified as being lion friendly. So that creates, again, a really tangible link between having lions and then having benefits. So supporting wildlife as a land use on community lands is a potentially really important strategy. So wildlife is a potentially really important way to augment and diversify livelihoods, particularly as climate change proceeds and as the climate becomes less reliable, rainfall becomes less reliable, and rain-fed agriculture and livestock become more and more vulnerable. Then wildlife kind of comes into its own because African wildlife tends to be drought adapted. So we've stepped in a number of cases to help support the establishment of community conservancies. For example, these guys here are in Makami Wildlife Management Area in northern Tanzania, which is a really important wildlife area for lions and many other species. We stepped in to support the Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association during COVID, for example, when their revenues from tourism really dried up. And then in the South Rift of Kenya, so here, we're supporting the local NGO Soralo, which is led by John Kamanga, the very impressive conservationist who's the second from the right there. And what Kamanga's outfit is trying to do is to keep the rangelands open for traditional pastoralism and try and kind of discourage local people from subdividing and selling their property for a kind of quick gain, which results in the complete loss of the cultural identity and cultural land legacy. But at the same time, it keeps these critical rangelands open for lions and other wildlife. So hugely impressive project down there in the South Rift. So this is I have to thank Shivani Bala for this photograph, which depicts well the next kind of category of coexistence related interventions that we're supporting, and that is reducing the cost associated with living with lions. As I said, they're not an easy animal to live with. They pose a real direct threat to livestock, but also to human life. So there are a number of approaches that our grantees are taking on to tackle human lion conflict. And so there tends to be a kind of suite of interventions that are similar across sites, but with local adaptations. And a lot of credit is due to the NGO Lion Guardians and Ewaso Lions in Kenya, both of whom established this kind of basic model that has been subsequently rolled out elsewhere in Africa. And a key tenet of this model is hiring young men of the kind of age set that would traditionally be involved in hunting or persecuting lions, and then getting them to work with local communities to advise people on how to look after livestock. A big part of this is collaring lions in high conflict zones and then setting up early warning systems, for example, through direct SMS or WhatsApp alerts, or by having the guardians go around and warn the local pastoralists. So that seems to work pretty well. In some contexts, when lions approach too close to livestock corrals or bomas, then the approach of hazing or chasing lions is adopted. So, for example, around Wangi, if the lions get too close to homesteads, then the Long Shields program of the Wild Crew team basically come out, and they have these plastic vuvuzelas or trumpets that they use to chase the lions back into the park. And they create a real racket which kind of scares the living daylights out of the animals, and then they move to safety and away from the area where they're at risk of being persecuted. So a key step is strengthening livestock corrals. So as you can see from the text there, so far this is a moving target. We've supported the strengthening of over 4,000 livestock corrals. I'm sure that figure is significantly higher already, actually. And the photograph on the screen is from Tanzania People and Wildlife in the Tarangire system. And they build these living walls made from this comifera that creates these really strong barriers that prevent the livestock from breaking out at night or lions from jumping in. And so they've had an incredible success with that. This is a mobile boma in northern Botswana from Claus Conservancy. And Wild Crew in Zimbabwe also have a similar approach. And it's got a twin benefit of, firstly, it greatly reduces livestock depredation by lions at night, but it also means that you can kind of move the livestock around the fields and use the livestock to effectively fertilize the fields and thus increase crop yields. This is an example of a corral in the Zambezi region of Namibia, where Kondo carnivores are doing quite remarkable work at reducing conflict. It really is one of my favorite projects, actually, just because they're so industrious and their impact has been quite remarkable. So improving herding is a big part of reducing human-lion conflict. This kind of site where you have a young kid, often under 10 years of age, looking after livestock, is really conducive to problems where there are lions. And so working with communities to improve the quality of the herding is important. For example, Clause Conservancy, I've mentioned them a few times today because they are doing fantastic work. But basically professionalized herding, and what they've done is they've pooled herds in the area in which they work, and then they have professional herders, and this has greatly reduced livestock depredation, and it also lends itself to rangeland management and more effective kind of use of the available pasture. Finding lost livestock is a key part of reducing conflict, because when livestock are kind of wandering around lost at night, they become extremely vulnerable to being killed by lions. And as you can see, our grantees have collectively rescued over 24,000 head of livestock so far since we've been supporting them. So it's a big deal, because also lost livestock are also very vulnerable to being stolen, of course. And then responding to conflict incidents is a very simple but effective tool, because if you can show that you care as a project about livelihoods and about people's livestock, it really does make a difference. And if you can pitch up and you know, as a lion guardian, allow yourself to kind of get shouted at by an angry pastoralist, and then take the time to kind of talk it through and then talk them down from any drastic action that they might take, it does really help. But as you can see from the text there, our grantees have responded to a huge number of conflict incidences and are known to have saved, you know, hundreds of lions by doing this. It's really effective. So living safely with lions is important. So some of our projects really work to educate local communities in terms of steps that can be taken to reduce the risk of human fatality from lions, because it does happen, unfortunately. And then a big part of this is treating injured lions where they occur in community lands, because particularly when they have snares on, because excuse the slightly gory picture, but if you see a lion like this, it's not going to be able to effectively hunt an animal like a buffalo. And so it's going to be much more likely to try and take on a kid or a person or something, and just a really easy prey item. So by removing snares like this, you can really reduce that kind of risk. Making provision for wild prey is important, because if lions don't have wild prey to eat, then they are bound to eat livestock. And so in the big pastoralist areas of the continent, then working with communities to do rangeland management is both important in terms of drought mitigation and reducing the risk of catastrophic livestock loss. But it also means that grazers such as buffalo and zebra can coexist in these areas, and thus give lions a choice, so they don't have to kill livestock. This again is the TPW team. So these are the TPW field rangers from the local community, proudly demonstrating the recovery of grassland in one of their rangeland management plots. And then they have this interactive center with the red roof that LRF supported the building of, where they provide regular feedback to the local pastoralists. And in doing this, this really reinforces the results of the rangeland management, and really helps to contribute ongoing buy-in of local pastoralists. So very impressive work again. Some of the coexistence strategies are tailored specifically to nomadic pastoralism, which is a big issue along the Sahel. So this kind of nomadic pastoralism is really challenging for conservation, because you have, you know, often massive numbers of livestock entering into protected areas, which creates competition for grazing, creates disease challenges, and it creates also a situation where lions are persecuted. And so African parks have been at the forefront of developing strategies to work with nomadic pastoralists. So one of the things that they've worked very effectively on is developing pastoralist corridors that go around conservation areas instead of right through the middle. And then what they do is they employ these local tango guys who are purposefully unarmed and dressed in this kind of unthreatening clothing. And then what they do is they tell the nomads where the corridors are, so they help to guide them around the conservation area. And then in those corridors, there's also provision for some support for the herders, for example, predator-proof bomas or corrals, and then some veterinary support for their livestock. And then these guys are also handing out some tea and sugar and things like that that are in massively short supply in some of these most wild parts of the continent. So The LRF has been operating now since 2017. This is our 8th year, shockingly. This is the footprint of the projects we're supporting. So you can see we've got a pretty broad footprint. Of course, not all projects are equal. There are some sites we're investing more than others, but we've really worked hard in the time that we've had. So by the end of the next granting round, which happens on Monday, we expect to have granted over $42 million, 300 grants, 98 conservation organizations across 25 different countries. So we've been working hard. Lions, as I said, are extremely responsive to conservation efforts. If you protect lions, they prey in their habitats, then lions will breed very quickly. And I'm going to give you some examples of the success that we've seen. So for example, in Kenya's South Rift, Soralo have done a really good job, as I said, at keeping those rangelands open, retaining connectivity between Amboseli and the Mara, and increasing the distribution of lions on community land completely outside of state protected areas. It's really impressive. And as I said, this project was designed and led by an indigenous Kenyan guy who's really impressive conservationist. Claus Conservancy, as I've said, have had enormous success. Their lion population in the area they've worked has jumped from about 40 to 77 this year in the last sort of 3 years or so. In their communally managed herds, they haven't had any livestock loss for about 3 years, and retaliatory killing of lions has dropped right down. In the Ngorongoro conservation area, Cope Lion have done some amazing work at re-establishing connectivity between the Ngorongoro crater and the Serengeti ecosystem, and thus providing the genetic rescue that was so desperately needed, because the lions in the crater were starting to become very inbred because of being cut off from the lions from the Serengeti. They've increased the tolerance of local pastoralists, and they've increased the area of occupancy and the amount of time that lions are spending in the wider Ngorongoro conservation area outside of the crater. In Laikipia, Lion Landscapes have done some amazing work, along with a lot of other conservation organizations in that area. The lion population has increased substantially, is up to about 300 individuals. The lions are very secure now on the commercial ranches, although, you know, if you go back 20 years ago to when I worked there was a huge amount of persecution of lions on those ranches. That has been dramatically reduced. And now Lion Landscapes are working to make the community group ranches much more friendly to lions, and also to unlock the benefits, as I said earlier, for local people of conserving lions and other species. The Masai Mara, in the community conservancies around the Mara Reserve, the densities of lions are higher than they are in the Mara National Reserve. And there is significant conflict there. And that's to some extent unavoidable because there are so many lions and there's so much livestock. But the efforts of KWT have reduced retaliatory killing of lions by 70% and reduced livestock depredation by about 50%. And what we see there is, although they've done great work at reducing this conflict, there is still quite a bit of conflict. But the tolerance for lions is remarkable. And that is ultimately because the communities are deriving huge financial benefits from having wildlife on their land in the conservancies. Excuse me. As I said, coming back to the Zambezi region of Namibia, Kondo carnivores have done amazing work. They've reduced retaliatory killing of lions by about 95%, reduced livestock depredation by about 90%. And this is the trend in the lion populations in the protected areas in the Zambezi region. So remarkable work done by a very small grassroots project. In the Luangwa Valley, Kambwiri Banda from Zambia Carnivore Program just published this awesome paper, which demonstrated the quantified impacts of desnaring lions in the Luangwa Valley on the demography of the lion population there. And it was shown that just by desnaring animals, so animals that are seen either caught in snares and stuck at the tree, but still alive, or animals that have managed to break out but have snare wounds, has managed to flip the Luangwa Valley lion population from a state where it would be declining to a state where it is increasing. So massively impressive piece of science, but also conservation work that we're very proud to support. And then I think the last example I'm going to give you is Chinko. Again, this is where AP are working in Eastern Central African Republic. But through their efforts to create these pastoralism corridors, they've managed to expand the area that's free of human impact from 5,000 square kilometers in 2017 to an area of over 30,000 square k's now and growing, where there's virtually no human impact at all. And so within that area, lion populations are starting to increase very quickly, as well as populations of a whole host of other wildlife species. It's quite exciting, I must say. So these are just a fraction of the good news stories. There's lots of other examples in our network. Particularly, I haven't really touched on the state protected area sector, which is I've spoken to many of you about before. There's lots of examples of where lions are increasing in that realm within our network. So there's lots of good things happening with lions. One word of warning, should we say a red flag, is that we are starting to see a significant uptick in targeted poaching of lions for their body parts in parts of Africa. And this is something that if it was to proceed and proliferate, could pose a real threat to the species. So we're not resting on our laurels. Like I said, things are going to get harder before they get easier. But what these examples show is that lions are really responsive to investment. We've got some really good actors out there, amazing communities who are keen and supportive. We've got governments who are supportive, NGO actors who are really competent. What we need is the funding to scale these interventions out sufficiently to achieve broad, widespread lion recovery. So I just want to say that's the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't waffle on too long, but I just want to say a massive thank you to every single one of you who've attended the call and every single one of you who supported the Lion Recovery Fund. We appreciate it big time. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Excellent presentation. And yes, I would love for folks from the audience to drop their questions for Pete into the chat, whether it's about lions or the Lion Recovery Fund, anything you heard that you want to hear more about. But Pete, to just get things started, like how does the Lion Recovery Fund work? So the LRF is a fund within WCN, but it's not its own organization in the field. So tell us a little bit about like what does your job look like day to day? How do you find these projects?
Yeah. So we, at the beginning of the formation of the Lion Recovery Fund, with extensive consultation with lion experts around Africa, we developed a science-based strategy to guide our investment. And then what we do is we go forth and raise funding from as many different sources as we can, take 100% of every dollar that's given to the Lion Recovery Fund, and then we grant that out to the best ideas for conserving lions, their habitats, and their prey according to that strategy, which I believe is available online if anyone's interested. And then my job is to find the best projects that are out there doing the best work to conserve lions, and then kind of figure out proportionality in terms of, if this is our budget, what proportion should we put it at each site? And so I already had a very good idea of who was doing what where when I started the LRF from the previous research that I've done. But now we have a really good idea because we spent a huge amount of time traveling around and doing field-based due diligence. So there's a very wordy answer to your question.
Great. And then maybe share a little bit about sort of some of the collaborators we have that are advising on projects, consulting you, things like that, to demonstrate that it's like really a network of conservationists.
Yeah, absolutely. So we the design of the strategy was extremely consultative. So what I would do at the beginning, this is going back to 2017, is I'd phone up key lion experts, present the strategy, and then ask them to tell me what was wrong with it. And eventually people stopped finding problems with it. So that's not to say it's perfect, but we're pretty happy with it. And then we do. So we have a granting committee so I'm not a member of the grants committee. So my job is to invite proposals. They are then reviewed by a professional granting committee. And then they decide if the project will be funded or not. But in cases where we need external input, sometimes we get people to review proposals, like external reviewers. And then if there's something we're not too sure about, we do have a network of technical advisors from different countries in Africa that can help us kind of chew over very complicated issues that we're grappling with.
Right. So I think one of the things that's been remarkable about the success of the LRF is that it's sort of this neutral body representing all of lion conservationists, right? It doesn't represent just one single organization or one single country, but as this umbrella support mechanism for everybody out there. And so as a result, like Hasn't it become the world's largest funding mechanism for lion conservation?
Yeah, yeah, no, it has, yeah, for sure. It definitely has a broader reach than any other mechanism that is set up for lion conservation, for sure.
Great. Um, okay, so we've got some questions coming in from the audience. Dana wants to know a little bit more about nomadic pastoralists and the work with them. Yeah, first of all, maybe what is a nomadic pastoralist?
Yeah, it's a lifestyle that's particularly prevalent in the Sahel, which is the savanna area between the forest and the desert in along in the northern hemisphere of Africa. And it's a kind of cultural response to the extreme seasonal variation in forage availability. So you have certain groups that are essentially on the move for big portions of the year to kind of in seek of pasture. And it does pose a lot of challenges in the modern context because Africa's a much busier place now, and because they go across international boundaries, and they move across kind of ethnic, cultural boundaries and so forth. And so it's a increasingly fraught lifestyle with challenges for the pastoralists. But it also kind of creates a lot of challenge. I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate livelihood option, of course, and it's developed in response to the environmental conditions that occur there. But it does pose some unique challenges just because of the huge numbers of livestock that are involved. And as a result, you can imagine if tens of thousands of cattle descend on a conservation area, it really does pose challenges.
And so earlier in your presentation, you were talking about rangeland management. And so rangeland refers to the areas where pastoralists are keeping their livestock, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So so managing rangeland, what does that look like with some of our partners?
So examples of people who are doing that are Lion Landscapes and Laikipia. I was just with them. And Tanzania people and wildlife, they've been doing it for a considerable amount of time around Tarangire. And what that is basically working with local communities to agree upon seasonal, it depends on the exact context, but basically seasonal rotational grazing and reserving grass banks so that they have like a drought store. um, yeah, and then making sure that you don't just have kind of unfettered grazing everywhere, which would result both in jeopardy for the pastoralist in the case of a drought, but also lack of forage for wild herbivores. And as I said, if the wild herbivores disappear, then and the wild herbivores that lions like the most are the big grazers. And so if they all disappear, then lions are going to end up eating more livestock. So it's not easy, but it can be a win-win for everyone involved,
So
including people.
maintaining healthy rangelands means healthy habitats, which means more abundant wildlife populations that can be the source of prey for lions and therefore increase lion numbers, as well as humans benefiting from that healthy landscape for their livestock.
Yes.
There's a question in here about human wildlife conflict. And I think this is an interesting question because it's something that we've talked about a lot before, where if we do achieve our vision of increasing lion numbers across Africa, we might see a rise in resulting conflict between humans and lions. So what are you seeing in terms of that? Sort of as the efforts of the Lion Recovery Fund are succeeding, as we're being more successful, does that play out with an increase in new problems like human lion conflict?
Definitely it does, yeah. I think we're starting to see that, for example, in Laikipia. As I said, the lion populations have increased significantly. And yeah, when some of these projects can end up being kind of a victim of their own success. I know that lion guardians in Kenya have had this challenge where they've been so successful in their conservation work that the lion population has increased, and that also creates a bit of a spike in conflict. So I think there is ultimately a kind of there's an ecological carrying capacity and there's a social carrying capacity, and I think eventually you get to the point where that is exceeded, and that obviously necessitates challenging conversations. But yeah, It is, you do run the risk of, if you're too successful, having lots of lions, which ultimately makes the conflict really difficult to deal with, for
And
sure.
that's why it's so important to offer those incentives to sort of unlock the value of keeping lions alive so that it sort of mitigates the negative consequences of the conflict. One
That's
of
right.
those incentives you mentioned was the lion-friendly beef initiative run by one of our partners. And we had a question from Gabriella and Justin about this. Can you share a little bit more about this program and how it works?
Yeah, so I don't have all of the details at my fingertips, but basically it's a form of conservation agreement where communities sign up to various kind of behavioral conditions. I did actually get sent the PDF today. So it's things like not taking lethal action against lions. It's protecting your livestock properly, making the effort to have proper livestock husbandry. It's doing rangeland management so that there's grass available for wild herbivores. It's tolerating and making provision for wild herbivores on your land, etc., etc. I'm afraid I can look up the details, but don't have them all on hand. But essentially, the communities come up with a deal like that, or they make an agreement like that with the NGO, and then the NGO then certifies the livestock produced on that unit of land as being lion friendly, and therefore go and market that in tourism lodges as at a premium, which provides those farmers with a reward for the hassle of living with lions. Because let's be honest, if you're a cattle farmer, it is easier just to shoot or poison the lions than it is to protect to have a proper herder, to protect your livestock at night, etc. So yeah, I think it takes work to live with lions, and I think having some kind of reward is entirely fair.
Yeah. You also mentioned a camera trapping incentive program. Maybe share a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So there's a few projects that are doing this. In fact, that it's increased over the years. One of them is around Ruaha, so that's again lion landscapes, and they're working in the community land right next to Ruaha National Park. And so what they've done is essentially signed a conservation agreement with the community, and basically there's a point system. So they put a put some money in a pot at the beginning of the year, and that amount of money can go up or down based on adherence to the conservation agreement. But there are certain points that they get for so each species being spotted on a camera trap on community land. And so if they, for example, see lions on community land, they get quite a lot of points. And so ultimately the points tally at the end of the year or the end of the season basically determines the amount of money that the community gets. And then they have a big event where the money is allocated to the community, and they have a process for deciding how those funds are used by the community. So I think, Colleen Begg in Nyasa was a real pioneer of this kind of work.
So Ruaha is in Tanzania and Niassa is in Mozambique.
That's
Um,
right.
one of the things I really like about this camera trap point system is that it's become a model that's replicable, not just in Tanzania or in Africa, but in other places and with other species. So the Lion Recovery Fund sister fund, the Pangolin Crisis Fund, is supporting a camera trap incentive project in the Philippines, rewarding communities there for pangolin sightings, which is really cool, having learned from the success that you've had in Africa. So somebody named Craig out there says, how's it? Where geographically are the greatest landscape opportunities for lion populations to not only recover, but to grow?
Yeah, good question. In terms of growth opportunities, I would say in Chinko is probably the number one, just because it's so big. Because
Where's Chinko?
that's in Eastern Central African Republic. So I think that the Chinko area will probably end up increasing the wildlife area. The African parks have got a mandate over about 65,000 square kilometers, which is truly massive. And I think that they could realistically secure at least 40,000 square kilometers with kind of no human impact really at all. So that's very high. The Kafui system, I think, is very promising, with all of the multiple efforts of lots of really effective NGOs there. That's a
Where's
really
Louis?
sorry, Paul. I've got to get out of my head a little bit. So that's in Zambia. So that's got, I think, got really big recovery potential. And then I think there's some places that have significant recovery potential if we can get enough funding to them. So, for example, Western South Sudan, Eastern South Sudan, have both got significant recovery potential. It's a challenging context, but there's huge. You probably heard the press release about the huge amount of migratory wildlife in Eastern South Sudan. So if those big wild landscapes can be effectively protected, and then Neokolokoba in Senegal, which is one of our longest standing projects that we've been supporting. That's where Panthera have been working to recover the tiny population of critically endangered West African lions there. There's now only 2 populations left in West Africa that we know for sure of. And their numbers have increased from fewer than 10 to over 40. And there's significant potential for increase. And Craig, I know as soon as I put this down, I'm going to be like, oh, I forgot to mention this place, not forgot to mention that place.
So we have a question here from Christopher, who asks, what resources do you have to verify performance of the individual grants and projects that we support? And do we constantly evaluate in order to determine future funding opportunities?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, yes, this is something that we're looking into more and more. So it's not so the ultimate outcome is obviously lion numbers, right? Now the slight complicating factor here is that a successful conservation outcome could be a stable population, or it could be a population that's not declining, or in some really extreme context, even a population that just declines a little bit is not a bad outcome. And so one has to be a little bit careful about how you interpret these kind of results. But with support, generous support from the Ayers Wildcat Conservation Fund, we've been over the last 18 months, we've rolled out a program to support lion surveys at real scale. So that'll help us really get to grips with what the ultimate impact of our granting is. But in places where lion surveys haven't yet been done, then looking at trends in threats to lions, whether it's poaching or whether it's livestock incursions or retaliatory killing, can give a strong indicator of success. So we do unpack this. We can't, we trust our grantees, but we do have to look critically at their performance, and we do. So I hope that answers your question on some level.
Great. And then you also started touching on a question from Paul Khalil, who asked about quantifying the benefits of more accurate population estimates. So you just mentioned this lion survey approach that we have. Can you drill into that a little bit more for Paul?
Yeah. So I mean, if you really want to get into the guts of the methods, I would definitely refer you to my colleague who's the big expert. But essentially, it's about spatially explicit capture, mark, recapture. So essentially trying to identify as many individuals as possible within the populations, and then using analytics to assess either the proportion of times that those animals are resighted. And so my colleague, Nick Elliott, has been rolling out kind of with a lot of partners around Africa, these more robust surveys. And what we do generally find in areas where lions haven't been surveyed, normally, if you do proper surveys, there are fewer lions than we thought there were. And it doesn't necessarily reflect the decline. It normally reflects the fact that proper surveys have never been done. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Question from Susan about translocating lions. So this is another type of program that we support through the Lion Recovery Fund. She notes that it can be dangerous for the lions. So can you just comment on lion translocations?
Yeah, so translocations for lions are not particularly dangerous, for example, if you do a reintroduction and the steps have been taken to prepare the site for the reintroduction. So the actual process of darting, moving lions is not very risky. I'd refer you to my colleague Marcus Hofmeyer, the director of the Rhino Recovery Fund, who was the head vet of Kruger for many years. And I'm sure he would back me up in this statement. So that the process per se is not particularly risky. What is risky for lions is if lions are moved into an area that hasn't been properly prepared for them, so that the threats are still there. Or the most common thing is where problem lions are kind of caught and then dumped in a protected area like that. That's highly risky for lions because often they kind of try and move straight back to the area that they came from, or that they might get hammered by the lions that occur in situ, or they might move out the protected area and get hit by people. So one of the most challenging scenarios we have, and we don't have all the answers for this, I must say, but is where there's not a lion conservation project and then lions pitch up in the middle of community land and start causing havoc. And then there's political pressure to deal with those lions. And then most wildlife authorities, and one has to be very sympathetic to their plight because there's no easy answers in that case, will often end up catching and moving them and dumping them in the park. And that it's not ideal by any stretch. So we have some colleagues and I worked on a paper where we looked at the kind of conditions under which lion translocations are advisable from a conservation perspective. So that's something we worked on. But yeah, but like having said that, lion reintroductions are a very important tool in the toolkit for lion conservation. And there are a few that have been undertaken already very successfully, and a few two planned for this year.
Great. Some great questions and comments coming in from Elisabetta, who's asking about and commenting about the importance of raising global awareness for lions in places around the world that aren't necessarily familiar with the details of lion conservation. So the LRF, both through some of the campaign work that we've been doing, but also through some of our funding partners, we've been trying to sort of raise the public will for lions and lion conservation. Can you share a little bit about the importance of that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's really important to raise awareness within Africa, for example, of the plight of lions on the continent. I think it's important to make African people aware and proud of how amazing it is that the continent's still got so much wildlife compared to anywhere else in the world. But so making people very proud of their wildlife assets, while at the same time making people aware that they can't be taken for granted and that there are challenges and that your behavior does affect outcomes of conservation. But equally, global behavior affects conservation outcomes. As I said, excessive consumption affects prospects for conservation of nature, and also in terms of soliciting donations for the LRF or for other conservation organizations for that matter. This is all contingent on people understanding the problem and that solutions are in place that work to turn things around. And Elisabetta, you've got a role as a journalist to write about this stuff, so I know you do.
Yeah, and also giving a shout out to our friends over at Disney. We've worked with Disney in the past on the Protect the Pride campaign around the live action Lion King that came out a couple years ago, and they've been fantastic supporters of the Lion Recovery Fund.
Yes, how could I forget to mention that? Some amazing outreach done around that movie, so thanks, Disney.
Yeah. We are getting close to time, but a question coming in from our friend Ruth about going back to livestock corrals, or bomas, as some people call them. She notes that they're a great idea and asks if the live corrals being used, if they're being well adopted by nomadic pastoralists. And if used, is there a significant impact on the ecosystem?
So they're not really used by the nomadic pastoralists because they are too mobile to have fixed bomas like that. So the living walls are like fixed. So they operate in one area. So that's not an approach that's used in the Sahel. But in places like Masailand, where, I mean, there is a bit of local kind of seasonal movement of livestock for sure, but it's not the kind of big, systematic, huge movements and constant movements that the nomads in the Sahel make. But they are very effective, and they're also quite green, because you're essentially planting a bunch of trees, and they have a really luxuriant shrubbery, and so they're very effective, and I think they make the place look nicer, and I think they add to the ecology. So I don't know if I answered your question, but they're good.
That's great. All right, Pete, 8 years down, what's going to happen with the LRF and Lions in the next 8 years?
It depends on me not keeling over, but yeah, I think we've got the systems in place now. We know what we're doing. We've learned some lessons along the way. Of course, we have, like any conservation initiative, and I think we have a really strong sense as to who's doing what where and what works. And so we're well set. I've always said that we could deploy 10 times the funding every year if we had it effectively. And so yeah, I look forward to the opportunity to try and get funding to the best ideas for conserving lions, their habitats, and their prey as much as possible, as fast as possible.
Great. Well, we don't want you to keel over anytime soon. We need you out there. Okay, so Pete, I want to say a big thanks for the presentation and the conversation, and a huge thanks to everybody out there watching. Hope you found this interesting. If I wasn't able to get to your question, we will follow up with you. I also want to mention again that August 10th is World Lion Day. So it's really a great opportunity to go online, share the news about lion conservation, about the Lion Recovery Fund. If you can, please support our work. You can make a tax-deductible donation to the Lion Recovery Fund, and we will guarantee that 100% of your donation gets sent to the field. Thank you for spending your Wednesday with us. And if you liked what you heard today and you want to learn more about another amazing animal called the Saiga antelope, please join us for that webinar, which is on August 23rd. Until then, wish you well, be safe, and thanks again for joining us. Good night.
Thank you, folks.